Hi, my name is Reed Silverne. The name of the show is Fed Pride. The reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal employee and proud of it. I am taping this show on Friday, the 5th of January. The earliest you'll probably see it would be 6, 7, 8, the 9th or 10th of January, which would be Tuesday, and probably the week after. Therefore, anything I talk about today, of course, is going to be tremendously old news by the time anybody sees it, and that's part of the deal over here, and that's always been part of the deal with the way I've been doing the show, at least for the last 8, 9 months. One time I was actually live to live. I've chosen to go live to tape because I was able to get a slot for it, and I like it. Again, this is 2007. 2007 is a big date for me personally because, of course, you can see the name of the show is Fed Pride. I am a federal employee, and on top of that, 2007 will be my 30th year in federal service, knock on wood, in a number of months. So I'm happy to be in 2007. I've been looking forward to this year. Talked about my 30th year in service for quite a while, and I'm just overjoyed to be here. So what's going on in the world? Again, this is the first show in 2007 that I've been able to do. If you've been watching lately, and I'm sure there are one or two out there who have, I've had the Quilter ladies on the last couple weeks, and there is going to be a Quilter show. It's going to be the 11th, 12th, and 13th of January at the Convention Center. So anybody who's interested in quilts, welcome to go there. However, I am a Fed Pride guy, not the Quilter Guild show person. So there you are. So now we're going to go back to Fed Pride as normal, if there is a normal for Fed Pride. So what's to talk about? The main thing to talk about is that the impact of the 2006 election is beginning to take place. The Democrats are now in charge of the House and the Senate. There's a new Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. She's been officially elected, although it was inevitable that she would be the Speaker of the House because it just follows a straight party line vote. And she beat John Boehner, who is the House Majority Leader, not the Speaker of the House the last time. And Hastert didn't even try to go for it. I don't even know if he's still in the leadership. He was the old Republican Speaker of the House, although the Majority Leader and the Whip had taken a lot of the power away from the Speaker of the House, just because the previous Majority Leader, who was Tom DeLay, had a very strong personality and had basically taken over the Republicans in the House. Same thing with the Senate. Senator Reed of Nevada is now the Majority Leader. The Democrats have a razor-thin majority. It had been, I believe, 51-49, but one of the senators had I believe it was a brain aneurysm, which means bleeding in the brain. He's in a coma right now in a hospital, so we'll see what happens there. Even if that happens, then it would be 50-49. Unless he actually dies and is replaced, and the Republican governor of, I believe it's South Dakota, might be North Dakota, but I guess I should know that. I'm obviously not ready on that score. I believe it is South Dakota. And he can appoint a Republican to replace him, and that would create a 50-50 tie. 50-50 tie in the Senate is broken by the vice president, who is technically the president pro tem of the Senate. So, or he's the presiding person over the Senate. He's basically the Speaker of the Senate. So constitutionally, the Republicans could take back the Senate, and of course, I'll keep an eye on that. As I said in one of my shows, I am for divided government. I don't trust either party to control both Congress and the presidency, the executive branch. Executive branch has tremendous power over everybody. There's no doubt about it. And the power over everybody is increasing exponentially, especially with these presidential signings and the assertion of the power without going to FISA court to review mail, to tap without getting court orders, and a lot of other things that basically in the war of terror seems like a small increase in power and one that's necessary. However, the point is that there was a mechanism for that, which were these special intelligence courts, which have been bypassed. So that's going to be another thing I personally am going to watch, because I believe that we need a Congress to oversee the executive, and we need a Supreme Court. We need to have 3 independent branches. That's basically what the Founding Fathers set up. Keep this country from going totalitarian. This country is not totalitarian. It is a democracy, true democracy in my opinion, and I'd like it to stay that way. And the easiest way for it to stay that way is to have checks and balances over the presidency, over the executive branch, to make sure that people are going to do the right thing, or if they're not going to do the right thing, they're at least going to look over their shoulder when they do the wrong thing. And I think the fact that we had the Senate, the House, the presidency, all controlled by the same party, that party was proceeding slowly but surely to pack the Supreme Court, or at least to select Supreme Court nominees and get them onto the Supreme Court. The result has been not divided government. And I think that it's because of that that we've had this stampede to go into Iraq. I have to admit, I was for throwing out Saddam Hussein. I thought Saddam Hussein was a genocidal maniac. I'm glad that they hung him. I think it's terrible that they ended up taking pictures and distributing them, because it made him look like more of a martyr than a criminal, especially with the with all of the guards calling out the names of their militias, so on and so forth. But that's Iraq. I'm not really that worried about it. And I don't think it'll have that big a long-term impact. Apparently the Sunnis have just gone ahead with the sectarian violence as usual. Same thing with the Shiites. It really has very little impact one way or the other, whether they actually executed Saddam Hussein. However, I'm glad that he's been executed, because now, if worse came to worse, he can't take back over because he's dead. So his sons are dead as well. His half-brother, who was the head of his intelligence, is due to be executed probably in a couple days. Probably by the time you see it, the deed will have been done. And the result is the Hussein dynasty, I think, is pretty much over. However, what's left? And there's been a very, very big change since the election, and that is basically the ousting of Donald Rumsfeld from the Defense Department. He's no longer the Secretary of Defense, and that has led to the beginning of some massive changes. A fellow named Robert Gates, who's actually out of the intelligence community, has taken over. Robert Gates is well known to be kind of a loyalist to George H.W. Bush, Herbert Walker Bush, George W. Bush's dad. Scowcroft is another one of those guys. Baker, the guy who actually got George W. Bush in office, because he was the guy who handled the Florida fiasco, where basically there was an even Steven popular vote in Florida, and the electoral votes could have gone either way. It was James Baker, who's another one of Bush Sr., Bush 41 they call him, he was the 41st president, group that actually pushed that over, handled that brilliantly politically and legally as well, so that there wouldn't be a recount. And George H.W. Bush was recognized as the 43rd president of the United States, which he still is. However, he did get reelected in 2004, and I was hoping that Rumsfeld would be ousted along with Colin Powell and a lot of the other cabinet members in 2004. Unfortunately, Rumsfeld managed to stay in power, very, very close to George W. Bush, and very, very even closer to the Vice President of the United States, Dick Cheney. And with Dick Cheney behind him, Rumsfeld was untouchable. However, this election that basically literally overthrew majorities in both the House and Senate for the Republicans. It wasn't just the war in Iraq, but the war in Iraq definitely contributed to it. And the fact that over the last 2 years of Rumsfeld's, not just his reign, but his continued reign, with no improvement, in fact, a lot of backsteps and a lot of worsening of the situation, Rumsfeld basically, his whole theory of defense has been completely proven worthless and wrong. Rumsfeld's theory of defense is called transformation. Anybody involved in defense has heard of this. And transformation basically is to say reduce the number of troops throughout the world, reduce the number of troops, especially overseas, and replace these troops with high tech. So basically we would end up with kind of the military that you see in the Terminator movies and so on and so forth, with chips on every single vehicle, chips in each soldier's armor, chips on every ship, chips in every plane, all going up to a satellite and having a super network that controls everything, that can be viewed instantly by the Secretary of Defense and the President at any place at any time. What's the problem with that? The problem with that is completely counter to the military philosophy that America has had, that made America great, which is basically to push the initiative down to the lowest possible level in the military, down to the company, down to the platoon, down to the individual lieutenant, captain, sergeant, so on and so forth, who's out there in the field, who knows what's going on, so that they can do what they need to do to win the battle as it's being fought. And everything in this war, everything in the war in Iraq especially, has been micromanaged at the top, and decisions have been made that basically pushed the decision-making higher and higher. In fact, a lot of it on Rumsfeld's personal desk, so that he has been responsible for almost all the mistakes that have been made. What are they? I'll go over them real quick because everybody's heard them. The first and biggest was to set up a coalition provisional authority, CPA, under Mr. Bremer, basically to have the American Defense Department become the government of Iraq for a year. Complete and total disaster, lots and lots of corruption during that period. The second big mistake, which was to take the military of Iraq, which was controlled by the Ba'athist Party, controlled by Saddam Hussein's party, instead of just taking out the Saddam loyalists and leaving the technocrats, they dissolved the entire military, and it basically created an instant 500,000 unemployables who immediately joined the insurgency. So that the insurgency, at least the Sunni part of the insurgency, was greatly expanded almost instantly. Third mistake, which was almost exclusively Rumsfeld, was denying that an insurgency was started. Intelligence reports said that the insurgency had already started during the initial successful attack on Saddam Hussein's Iraq, that there were already roadside bombs, there were already attacks with RPGs, that there were already irregulars and people without any uniforms already out in the field, and that the insurgency had already been started, and that there was a plan for the Saddam Fedayeen, who were the Saddamist irregulars, to form guerrilla bands and to start an insurgency. Uh, that was the first set of mistakes. And that was offset very much by a guy who's in the news right now, and his name is Negroponte. Negroponte had become the ambassador to Iraq. He was basically responsible for dismembering and getting rid of the Coalition Provisional Authority. Worst idea we've ever had. We should have taken Iraq, and we should have done the same thing we had done previously in Afghanistan, and had the UN set up a government, put that government in place immediately, and take whatever whatever authority there was in the country and put it underneath this government. That had happened in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has been, even though it does have an insurgency, it's not nearly as bad. There's been tremendous success by comparison with what was done in Iraq. So these three mistakes, initial mistakes, were made almost exclusively by Rumsfeld and his cronies. Some of his cronies had immediately, or not immediately, but very, very soon retired. Tommy Franks, the guy who is the general in charge of the initial advance, he retired. He got out of it. General Myers was in there for years. General Myers has replaced Shinseki, who was thrown out basically by Rumsfeld. It's when Rumsfeld basically took over the military, kind of a coup from the top, and basically took out all the independence of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to even give him advice. And after that, his next set of mistakes was refusing to expand our presence. Even though John McCain said it, all the outside leaders said it, a whole bunch of ex-generals had come together and had called for Rumsfeld's ouster about 2 years ago, even before the 2004 election. And had that occurred, things might be better today. Again, he had a very, very small group out there. He thought that he could handle things with high tech. Of course, high tech doesn't work against a low tech insurgency. And since the basis of the insurgency was mostly roadside bombs, it'd take years, possibly a decade, to set up a high tech solution to roadside bombs. Of course, the lowest tech solution and the most evil is to take the other side and to make them walk the streets and then blow them, get blown up, so that you know that there are bombs there or not. However, we're good folks, and we just don't do things like that. So we lost thousands of our troops to roadside bombs, to sudden ambush attacks, and to RPGs, which were remotely targeted grenades, and a whole bunch of other things. So we've had problems over there. There's no doubt about it. Now, politically, things improved. About 2004, part of 2005, mostly because a guy named Negroponte took over the diplomacy of it. And Negroponte did a couple really good things. One of them was to get rid of the CPA, put in a temporary authority, set up elections in Iraq. A guy named Alawi had taken over, and I guess Chalabi, who's the guy that we had supported earlier, probably was disappointed by the whole thing. And Alawi, who is a moderate Shiite, and of course there's 60 million Shiites, 4 million Sunnis, 4 million Kurds. And there's basically an alliance between the Kurds and the Shiites, and Iran are probably our worst enemy in the world today, versus the Sunnis. And the Sunnis are split, and we don't know how badly they're split, between Al-Qaeda, our other worst enemies in the entire world, our worst enemies in the Sunni world, and people who are just bloodthirsty, and the old Saddamites. And again, we don't even know, at least if we do, it hasn't come out in the press, how much of the Sunni insurgency were Al-Qaeda and how much of them were Saddamists, and why we can't even seem to tell the difference. Now, the Saddamists are mostly attacking us. The Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and that was under a guy named Zarqawi, who we eventually did kill, which was a good thing. Their theory was that they can take over the Sunnis in Iraq, which is about 4 million people, and one big province, the slight majority in Baghdad urban area, and kind of even Steven in two other provinces. But that totals only 4 million people out of a total population of 24. So these Al-Qaedas in Iraq decided they wanted to start a civil war, and over a period of a year, from 2003, 2004, 2005, they started attacking not the nascent government of Iraq, not American troops, although they did attack some American troops in some operations, but the Shiites. And finally, push came to shove. The Shiites, who were in a majority, who were winning the elections, who were taking over the government, who basically, whose members of whose militia were the core of the army and the police force that we were training and that we were spending $100 billion to train, all are Shiites. And ironically, Shiites are basically the same type of Muslim as Iran. And of course, Iran is our worst enemy, probably, of individual countries throughout the Middle East, as opposed to a movement like Al-Qaeda. So it worked. They finally blew up a major shrine, Shiite shrine, that happened to be in the Sunni area. It was in Samarra. And they blew up this mosque, killed a lot of Shiites at prayer, and that was the last straw. The Shiites came back like gangbusters, and basically in Baghdad especially, but in the provinces north of Baghdad, in the provinces just south of Baghdad, they counterattacked, and Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which had been slitting people's throats and throwing bodies on the ground, especially in Mosul and Fallujah and various other places, all of a sudden they found out what that was like, because the Shiites came back and they not only slaughtered, 10 or 20 at a time, but hundreds, literally hundreds. And there were bodies all over, especially Baghdad. And basically what occurred in the last year, and we did not have the troops to be able to deal with it, put in an extra 9,000 a few months ago, was the Shiite counterattack, which was basically an ethnic cleansing, old-fashioned ethnic cleansing, which was to get every possible Sunni out of neighborhoods that were majority Shiite, and out of areas that were majority Shiite. So a lot of the areas north of Baghdad and south of Baghdad, north of Baghdad is very important because that is the communication, that mixed area between the Kurds and the northern oil fields and Baghdad proper. And then there's an area south of Baghdad, which is also a mixed area, where there was, they used to call it the Triangle of Death, because the Sunni Al-Qaeda type insurgents were so strong there. The Shiites came back, they just started killing everybody that they could get their hands on. So now they say that the ethnic cleansing, which is kicking all the Sunnis out of the Shiite areas and all the Shiites out of the Sunni areas, it's about 2/3 complete at this point. And basically there's about 2 to 3 million internal refugees that have been developed in the last year and a half since what I would call a civil war, an ethnic war, has begun. And the question is, will a surge in American troops slow that down so that the Iraqi government can take over? However, the other question is, who is the Iraqi government? And aren't we training the Shiite militias when we're training the Iraqi army and when we're training the Iraqi police force, national police force? And of course, what's turned out is that, yes, we are. We're really training these militias that are throwing them out. What's the solution? The Iraqi constitution says that there should be 3 regions: Sunni region, a Shiite region, and a Kurdish region, all semi-autonomous with their own police forces. I think that's what's going to happen. The name of the show is Fed Pride. The reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker and proud of it. Happy New Year, everybody that hasn't already been there, and thank you very much.